Here's an example of what our end goal is for today with this video. We're going to have 4 corner posts in at the appropriate depth. We're going to have strings run along the length and the ends, and we're also going to have the tunnel squared up so that we can install all of the anchors where they need to be. The first step is going to be picking a firm side, or the length of where your tunnel will be located. This is a side that won't change, and this is a side you want. So in this scenario, we're directly adjacent to another greenhouse, so we're going to want to make sure that our length of tunnel runs next to that, the same distance from that tunnel all the way down. So the first step, what we're going to do is we're going to measure off the side of that existing greenhouse, and if you have a fence or something, you can do the same thing that we're doing. So you're going to measure off that, pick a point, push a rebar, or pound that rebar into the ground to mark where that distance is, and you're just going to take that distance and you're going to match it. So you're going to go down to the other end of the greenhouse, or as I said, if you have a fence, go down to the other length of the fence, and you're going to measure off it in the same manner that you just did. So in this scenario here, we're measuring off the same exact distance we did at the front of the tunnel, and we're going to make that mark and push another piece of rebar into the ground right at that same distance. Doing this is going to allow us to run a string the full length across those pieces of rebar and have that length be the same distance from that greenhouse the full way down. So you can see here what I'm doing is I'm pounding in another rebar, and this is, as you can tell, it's on the exterior of where your corner will be for your greenhouse. And the reason you do that is because you're going to want to have the ability to move the string back and forth, and you want to have the greenhouse corners end up where strings intersect. It's the easiest way to square the tunnel. So you're just going to take this and you're going to walk it all the way down. In this case, this structure is 96 feet, so I'm going to walk this 96 feet down. And it's okay that the greenhouse next to us isn't as long as the tunnel we're doing. We still have 2 points at which we can use to make sure that our string creates a straight line of sight. So here, we have the string laid out. It's longer than 96 feet, which is the length of the greenhouse. And we're going to run the tape now from where we set our original rebar to get that 96-foot length. This is going to be the length of our tunnel. And so I'm making a mark here at the far end, and I'm pushing a piece of rebar directly where our future corner of the greenhouse or high tunnel will be. So one last thing here, we have the string laid out. Now we're going to take that string that's laying out. Again, it's longer than 96 feet because we want that string to shoot past where our future corners will be. I'm going to pull this tight now. And I'm going to pull this tight, and I'm going to watch. I'm going to watch to see where the string comes in contact with the 2 pieces of rebar that we originally used when measuring off of the adjacent greenhouse. So I want to just barely touch those. I want to shoot that string past where I made the 96-foot mark, and that's ultimately going to be where we have our firm side to the tunnel. So we have our side marked, we have our future corners marked, and we're now ready to move on. Next step is to measure off the width of your structure. In this case, it's 30 feet, and you're going to mark, again, roughly where your other future corner will go. So I'm putting a piece of rebar, pushing it into the ground. That's the other front corner of this structure. So that's where we're roughly going to have the other corner. But now we need to put in another piece of rebar so that we can run a string from the exterior of our future tunnel all the way down to the other end of the tunnel. So we're going to repeat the steps we just did on the front on the back. We're going to take the tape measure down there, and we're going to measure off the firm line we have closest to the greenhouse on the left, and we're going to measure our 30 feet width. So we're measuring off, pulling tight, and pushing in another piece of rebar for our 4th future corner of the tunnel. After I do that, I'm going to put another piece of rebar a little further from the front of the greenhouse so that we can run that string from the exterior of the front to the exterior of the back, and we'll have our 2nd full-length side set for where this tunnel will go. Once you have your 2 side strings set and run, you're now ready to take a string and run it across the future front face of where your greenhouse will be installed. We made a mark on the string running the full length of the tunnel, the first line we ran, and that's where our corner is going to intersect. So we moved a piece of rebar further from the width of that tunnel, as you can see here on the left. And now that string, we're trying to shoot it across the mark we made. And we're doing that on the far side as well. We made a mark on that length of string, and we're just trying to push a piece of rebar on the exterior of that side to match the exterior of our near side here. And that is what we're going to use to run the front face string. And that line is going to mark where the front face of our tunnel will be, at least temporarily. We might have to move it when we actually do our corner-to-corner measurements to square up. Now we have a front face line run, and we're going to take a tape measure and measure from that front-facing line at each side string. And we're going to run it the full length of the tunnel, and we're going to make a mark where 96 feet is, or at the length of the tunnel. Reason we're going to do this, if you recall, I said that the strings running the full length of the tunnel at the sides are actually longer than the length of the structure. We want the strings to intersect at our future corners, which is why we're measuring 96 feet off of the front face, so we can run a string across the rear face of the tunnel as well. Now that we have all 4 strings run across the sides and the front and rear of the tunnel, we can measure from corner to corner of the structure. And this is simply to square the structure up. Essentially, you run from over where the strings intersect on one side to the caddy corner, and then you repeat this process on the other 2 corners of the structure. When you have a measurement that is identical from each of those measurements, your structure is a square structure and you can proceed. And when I say square structure, I mean that you won't be building a rhombus greenhouse. It'll be a rectangle or a square depending on the dimensions of the structure you purchased. However, this is what I mean when I say this structure has been squared and you are ready to proceed. If you do need to make adjustments, just measure twice, anchor once. So make sure you have your 30-foot width or whatever width your structure is by the length after you have squared your structure. So you want to double check everything before you move on. Once everything's squared up and you have all 4 strings run, as you can see here, one of the ground posts or anchors have been secured to the appropriate depth. And depth will vary based on this type of structure you have, but you'll anchor that first corner along that firm string there on the length to the appropriate depth. You'll double check your measurement for length. In this case, it's 96 feet. And then once you get that, you're going to make a mark and just make sure that that lines up with that rear line you had previously run. Usually does, but sometimes you might need to adjust that line a little bit. After you've double checked, you're now ready to get a ground post, and as you can see on the far end there, you're ready to anchor your other corner ground post along that length. And you're going to anchor that to the appropriate depth as well. And so yes, the ground goes up and down. It's not perfect ground the full length of the tunnel, but your corners are going to be anchored at the same depth, and you're going to use them as a guide for the rest of the ground post anchors from one end all the way to the other. And you can see there, we're checking it, getting it to the appropriate depth, hitting it, just a few times to finish it off. You want the top of your ground post anchors to be level from one side of your tunnel to the other side of your tunnel. So in this scenario, we're using a transit, which is a tool that helps you level. You can also use a line level to do this part. But essentially, you're going to make sure that the ground posts on one side are level to the ground posts opposite them on the other side of the tunnel. So in this case, we're using the transit and putting it on top of the ground post. We'll do the same on the opposite side of the tunnel. If you're using a line level, you'll put a line level on that front-facing string, and you'll make sure that the line crosses the ground posts at the same point on those ground posts on either side. Once you have this completed along the front face of your tunnel, go to the rear end of your tunnel and repeat this exact same process. Now that your tunnel has been squared up, all 4 corners have been set, and your strings were appropriately put in place, you're now ready to make marks for where all the other ground posts need to be anchored, and you're ready to anchor them all into place and to the appropriate depth. That'll be covered in a future video. If you want to watch that video now, you can click on the icon directing you to it. If you're interested in videos like this or videos relating to greenhouses, please subscribe to our channel and we'll have more for you. We'll also include a link in the description to the specific greenhouse we used when making this video.